Okay, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. We are now ready to hop back in. We missed last week's class. It was Purim. Last week, Tuesday. Wednesday was the day after. Anyways, we are holding, if you're following along in the English Sefer Yetzirah, on page 51. Excuse me. On chapter 1, we are still in chapter 1 in subsection 6. And we are moving right along in chapter 1. We're not even halfway done with chapter 1, but that's okay. We're not in a rush. The main thing is to go deep and to understand what we're talking about. And the camera is crooked, but I'll just leave it crooked because otherwise we'll be here all night with my OCD trying to make it straight. Okay, so now we're going a little bit deeper into these 10 sfirot, Esther Sfirot Blima, that we've been working on and speaking about for quite some time now. Excuse me. So let's read inside. Chapter 1, subsection 6. Esther Sfirot Blima. And again, this is this saying has been repeated many times. The Esther Sfirot Blima. In fact, going back into very interesting, if we travel backwards, the entire chapter 1. And this is interesting just to think about because we know that nothing in the Torah is accidental. Everything is precise. So no words are duplicated if they're not necessary. And yet we go back from chapter 1, and if we start in chapter 1, subsection 2, it opens up with Esther Sfirot Blima. Then go to chapter 1, subsection 3, and it opens up with Esther Sfirot Blima. And chapter 1, subsection 4, once again, Esther Sfirot Blima. Chapter 1, subsection 5, look at that, Esther Sfirot Blima. And here we are again at chapter 1, subsection 6, again opening up with Esther Sfirot Blima. So we see that this theme is continuing on through many chapters, and it appears to keep going up until chapter 1, subsection 9, to show the importance of emphasizing this concept that these 10 sfirot are blima. Because it could have just, wow, excuse me, an itching cough here. It could have just started off in chapter 1, subsection 2, where it said Esther Sfirot Blima. And then every subsequent chapter just said Esther Sfirot. So why is it that the Sefer Yetzirah finds it necessary to repeat the sequence of Blima? It's just showing how important and meaningful that this qualifier is, that these Sfirot are Blima, meaning of nothingness. We've talked about that at length. I'm not going to go through it again right now. So Esther Sfirot Blima, 10 Sfirot of nothingness. Tzafiten ka mara'a habazak. Their vision is like the appearance of lightning. The taklis ein lehem kates, and their limit has no end. B'dibroi behen baratzo v'shoiv, and his word in them, Hashem, is running and returning. The ma'amro kasofa yirirofo yiridofo lifnei kisoy heim mishtachavim, and they rush to his saying like a whirlwind, and before his throne they prostrate themselves. Wow, that's a powerful pasuk right there. So let's go inside because we're going to talk about each one of these parts of this pasuk. Okay, we start out with their vision. The word for vision here is tzafiyah, which usually denotes a prophetical or mystical vision. The Hekalot, an ancient mystical text, which might be contemporary to Sefer Yetzirah, speaks of this vision, tzafiyah, of the Markava. The Markava is the divine chariot seen in the prophet Yechezkel's vision, and the term is used to denote the mystical experience on its highest level. There's a lot of text written on, I'm generalizing, but there's two great mysteries that are discussed in the Torah, that there are a lot of qualifications and a lot of details discussed as to whether or not they should be permitted to be learned, who is capable of learning them. And those are basically what we call as Maseh Bereshis and Maseh Markava, which is the workings of creation, how God created the world, and the workings of the divine chariot. So the workings of creation, Maseh Bereshis, it's a little bit more lenient. They're less mystical. And it says that a proper student that is properly learned and has gone through certain levels of his learning with a proper teacher in the right conditions can be taught Maseh Bereshis. But Maseh Markava is not meant to be taught unless it's not meant to be taught one-on-one. It has to be a group. And there's a lot of qualifications because the working of the Markava, of the divine chariot, of how God, so to speak, lowers himself and travels from heavens throughout the worlds, is very deep mystical secrets that are really not meant to be disclosed. And in the prophet Yechezkel, he talks about the vision he sees, which is the appearance of a man on a throne, and goes through this concept of what is the Merkava, what is God's divine presence as it travels, if you will, from the upper worlds to the mystical realms into the lower worlds. So that being said, it says the Sefer Yetzirah is now describing how the Sefirot appear in a mystical vision. In earlier sections, the text spoke of the exercises used to visualize the Sefirot. And now it describes their appearance, right? Previously, we talked about these meditations that we can, for example, a depth, we'll use Netzach, right? So, or Netzach, which is connected to up. So we would focus on a depth of up, of closing your eyes and seeing how far you can travel in the inner workings of your mind to break through any barriers of what is considered up. Okay, what's up? There's a roof. What's above that? Okay, the sky and the heavens and the stars and the earth. Keep going, keep going. And the idea is that we're working on stretching our mind and opening up our capacity for our consciousness to expand our consciousness so that we can, if you will, visualize what the Sefirot would look like and what their depths of measurement look like. But now we're talking about their appearance, which is a little bit of a different of analysis. So now it says over here, the Bahir, which is another very ancient text, explains that the word Tzafiyah, derived from the root Tzafa, indicates that one is looking down from a high place. In the previous section, the Sefer Yetzirah spoke of the Sefirot as 10 depths. When one looks into a depth, however, one is usually looking downward. And the Hekalot, the mystical experience, is often described as a descent in a downward direction, and is called descending to the Merkava. In other words, downwards. One reason why gazing at the Sefirot is called a descent, or meaning going down, is because in order to accomplish this, one must first attain Chokhmah consciousness, as discussed earlier, right? We talked briefly about it. I'm not going to go into it again. It's enumerated in earlier classes, but this concept of Chokhmah consciousness is what we say a consciousness of nothingness, of the ability to empty your mind. You cannot traverse the Sefirot, you cannot traverse mystical planes, and you cannot traverse the mystical divine names of God and kind of leave your own consciousness, if you will, if you can't quiet the mind. Many ancient practices, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've gone through it at length, but many ancient practices talk about this, what is called a monkey mind, or a continuously noise in the mind. And that is kind of our unconscious, which is rattling off all the time. It's called Mayim Rabim, or waters that continue to flow. So you could be sitting and talking to someone, or listening to your children, or cooking, or working, and you're not involved in what you're doing. You're doing it with your hands, but your head is in a different place. The goal, as we've talked about numerous times, and I think I mentioned it in the last class, there's an opinion in the Zohar Kodesh that when there was what we say is the sin of the Eitz Chadas, the tree of knowledge, one of the main ramifications of that sin was that our conscious and our unconscious mind separated. And the whole journey is to repair conscious and unconscious thoughts. And a lot of teachings, a lot of healings are revolved around this idea of how you bridge between your conscious and your unconscious. And the idea is when you can get those two to meet, you enter into a state of flow. So when you're doing things, you're ever present. You're focused on what you're doing. You're in the moment of what you're doing. You're not traveling all over the place. Perfect example is Lubavitcher Rebbe. Anyone who is the schus of meeting the Rebbe would tell you, even though he's running the entire world and has thousands of organizations that he's responsible for, billions of dollars traveling, the second that he's with you, nothing else exists. He's looking in your eyes, and you're the only thing that matters in that world. And that's the reason his energy is so powerful. People say, like, I stood before the Rebbe and I felt like I was naked, like he saw through into my soul, because he's channeling all of his energy and there's nothing else present there. So we all have the ability to emulate this in a little bit. And this is what we say as Chokhmah consciousness, where we can be an empty mind to a place of nothingness. Chokhmah is the root of bittul. And this also explains what it means to be bittul, or to have Kabbalah's ol. Kabbalah's ol means when you're surrendering your will to God's will. Bittul means you're nullifying your will, meaning there's no place for, but what I want, but what I think, that doesn't exist in bittul. Bittul is, it's not there. I'm a channel for God, and whatever he's channeling me, as a simple servant, I'm doing it. So the Sefer Yetzirah is now saying, in order to go through this concept of what we say gazing at the Sefirot and having a descent, you have to have Chokhmah consciousness. Why is that? Because if your mind, we're dealing with such delicate, mystical, deep secrets. And if your mind, it says that the Kohen Gadol, if he entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim during Yom Kippur and had a single thought that was outside of the realm of his avoda, he died on the spot. Sounds intense, right? But that's kind of what we're talking about. Meaning, in our context, you wouldn't die, but you'd instantly be removed from the journey you're going on through this world. Because the second your mind goes into anything else, you're not there. And if you're not there, it's impossible to have mystical dimensions of going through the Sefirot. So continuing on, in the array of the Sefirot, however, Chokhmah is the highest, at least of those which are approachable. In climbing the tree of the 32 paths of wisdom, which the Sefer Yetzirah opened up, 32 mystical paths of wisdom, one must begin by attaching himself to Chokhmah consciousness. This is the start. You can't traverse, you can't go, you can't explore mystical, deep interpretations without Chokhmah consciousness. And just like we have the divine array of Sefirot over here, we know that Keter is pretty much pure godliness, it's the pipe, and then we go into Chokhmah. Without getting into this level of Chokhmah, you can't go any further. If you're not bittul to Hashem, you can't be his servant. You can't fulfill his will. The second you put yourself in the mix of, I'll do what God wants, but not with this, it's a finish, no place for it. And again, the same idea when you're traversing into these mystical, deep contemplations. And that's one of the reasons it said that the prophets, in order to prophesy, used to have to remove their clothing and become naked. So it doesn't necessarily mean literally they stripped down naked. It means they had to remove their garments of makshaba, divor, and maisa, of thought, speech, or action. They had to be so pure that they were able to channel that godly energy through them without any thoughts that are going to interrupt with that flow. And by the way, that's why there are so many, I don't want to say false prophets, but people who have, what should we say, spiritual sights. There's people like this in Israel. There's people like this here. People come to me all the time saying, I went to this healer and he told me, and it's like, what do you know about this person? Are they Shomer Shabbos? Are they keeping kosher? What is the relationship with their family? Like, are they a pure soul? Because if they're not a pure soul, you can't trust that what their information they're giving to you is accurate. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. How do you know? Maybe it's coming from a bad place, exactly. Because that person is in the way. Once your own consciousness is in the way, it automatically becomes diluted. And therefore, in order to climb the tree, and we've talked about this at length, that this Sephardic tree literally can be climbed. This means when one disconnects their soul from their body and travels to the upper worlds. In order to do that, you have to start with Chokhmah consciousness. When this is accomplished, one then looks down at the Sefirot, the other Sefirot. One then does not begin climbing the Sefirot. Only then does one begin climbing the Sefirot, beginning at the lowest level. Very interesting. Meaning, you got to start from up here and look downwards. You have to have a clear vision below. And then, once you're there with a Chokhmah consciousness, you could go down to Malchus and start ascending the tree. In other words, you can't properly ascend the tree going from down to up until you reach a place of chokhmah consciousness or awareness where you're separating yourself from yourself, so to speak. Okay, moving on to the next pasuk, where it says, their vision is like the appearance of lightning. What does that mean? Like the appearance of lightning. This is taken from the verse, and the chayot, running and returning, like the appearance of lightning. Lightning is bazak, which is also from the prophet Yechezkel, and it also is from that pasuk. How are you doing? We're on page 52. This is also from the prophet Yechezkel, because the entire vision of the chariot took place from the prophet Yechezkel. And that's where it says the chayot, which were one of the angels. There's many names of angels, but the angels called the chayot, says they were running and returning like the appearance of lightning, meaning they were going very quickly up and down from heaven to earth. And this movement that was moving in such a fast dimension appeared like lightning. It was like a flash in the sky. The word bazak, which is found only in this one place in the Torah, is usually translated as lightning or a spark. According to other interpretations, bazak denotes a flashing meteor or bursting bubble. According to all these opinions, the Sefer Yetzirah is stating that the Sfirot can only be visualized for an instant and then they vanish. Boom. No one's able to, you could perceive them in your mind, but to actually see them, it's a split second. It's literally a glimpse like a lightning. Like you see a lightning flash, and then it's gone. The great Kabbalist, Rabbi Moshe de Leon, best known as the publisher of the Zohar. He wasn't the author of the Zohar, that was Shimon Bar Yochai, but he was the first one to actually publish the Zohar. Offers an interesting analogy. When the Sfirot are seen in a mystical vision, their appearance is like sunlight reflected on a wall from a bowl of water. How's that for a visual? Sunlight reflected on a wall from a bowl of water. So there's a bowl of water, right? You could leave it like just sitting there, and the sun ray comes in, and it reflects off the bowl, and the little flash you see on the wall, that's what he's referring to. As long as the bowl is absolutely still, the reflected image is clear, right? That's what we say is chokhmah consciousness. But the slightest vibration causes it to break up and oscillate wildly. In other words, so a ray of light hits the bowl, and if and there's water in there, right? So if the water's not moving and it's just totally still, what you're going to get is a perfect little image of a light on the wall. But if you put your finger like that in the water or drop something in the water and it starts moving, it's going to get all distorted. And it's the same idea of what chokhmah consciousness is, what he's referring to. The second our own mind enters in, it's distorted. And that's why it's so hard. You know, I see sometimes some of these ridiculous websites. They're not, so to speak, goyish websites. They're websites about, people on the right, conservative people, and some of them are Catholic, and they talk all the time. They use this word prophet so loosely. Oh, what's his name had a prophecy. Oh, what's his name? It's not prophecy. Just because someone says something and it winds up becoming true doesn't mean make them a prophet. The Rambam goes at length to explain the qualifications to be a prophet. And I mean, you're talking about a handful of people in the existence of our history, because true prophecy is always correct. The second, in fact, it was in the Rambam, one of the commandments, I think was yesterday. If someone holds themselves out as a prophet, and anytime they ever say something that is not true, they have to be sent to death because they're a false prophet. There's no room, there's no margin of error for a prophet. It's everything or nothing. And like 99.99999% of people who think or claim that they have some level of prophecy, all they're doing is having an intuition that's going through their brain that makes sense to them, and they're repeating it, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. Okay, similarly, a clear vision of the Sfirot would be possible in the theory, but only if the mind were absolutely still and calm. The slightest exterior thought, however, destroys the image completely. When the mind is in a state where it can visualize the Sfirot, it is disturbed by the most minute distractions. And I don't know how to, I'm not even going to try to explain it from personal experiences, but I can just say that this is true. there's times that you can be in a mystical state and have kind of clarity on something, and in a split second, you lose it. I don't know how to explain it. The second your mind travels elsewhere, it's gone. And again, I try to make these classes applicable and not just talk about, the ancient mystics, but in our life, we can relate this to our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day activities. Think about how many percentage of the time, and I've given these statistics before, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's such a minute fraction. I mean, it's less than maybe 5%, 2%. It's a very small number of how many people throughout the day are actually present at any point in time. The majority of the time, whatever you're doing, you're not there. You're thinking of something else. You're listening to something else. You're watching something else. You're hearing something else. You're thinking about you're not there. To be truly, truly focused on something, and the Rebbe explains this is what makes the laser so powerful. What is a laser? It's concentrated light. It's concentrated energy. If you could take light and concentrate it into one beam, it could go through a wall. The second that light disperses a little bit, it loses all of its power. It has no power left to it. So it's the same thing with us. All day long, when our phones are vibrating, when we're texting 100 people a day, when we're flipping between 100 different apps, and then we want to know why we can't focus, we can't concentrate, and we can't get anything done, because our head is all the time, they call it TikTok brain, that whatever's going on in your phone is a reflection of your brain. And if you're bouncing all day long and watching all these videos and all these texts and liking and doing all this, and you put that down, you think your brain just goes to clear and says, okay, what's the next task? It's still running through your head. And you have that when you go to sleep at night. They say the worst thing to do is to look at a screen or a phone or a computer within an hour before you go to sleep. Because the second you put your head in the pillow and close your eyes, whatever you absorbed is omnipresent right there in your brain and continuing to move. So, yeah. So the ADD is an extreme example of this. And I'm not a big fan of labeling because they like to do it. There's an old saying, what comes first, the drug or the disease? If you go back to Time or Life magazine over the last 50 years, every few years they have a new disease and a new drug. Bipolar, split personality, ADD, and then they pump billions of dollars in medications to people because of whatever drug they identified it is. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. And some people truly do have it, and some people have to take medication for that.
People like in the old days with ADD were able to focus? You think people who had ADD who lived like in a different century?
I don't think it existed.
It was there, it just didn't have any.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
So maybe you're saying it's caused from.
It says during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. And a lot. There's a huge movement and discussions about the effect of technology and trauma. Technology is a form of rape. What is a rape? Rape is an unwanted energy that you can't control. You can't stop it from coming inside of you. When you're being bombarded by information that's shooting into you all day long from every single way, that's a form of entry that any normal person, if they were able to see the effect that all these things have on their brain and how it's making them so less productive and such meaningful, miserable lives. We have the most technologically advanced country we've ever had, universe we've ever had, with more apps, more connectivity tools, and we're more depressed, more isolated, more lonely, and take more medications than ever before. So it's bringing us closer or it's bringing us further apart. So, during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, both Beis Hamikdash, there was no diseases. No one died from a disease. No one got sick. So do the math. Why is that? Because God was so present in everyone's lives. And when you're connected in that level and you could have that level of energy, of clarity, there's no room for diseases to come inside. There's no room for sicknesses to come inside. So I'm not saying that ADD is that it's all made up. There are people who have it, and there are, believe, extreme situations where they have to take medications. But those medications are designed to help them. I'm not an expert in the medications, but I know people who have ADD and take medications and they're perfectly functioning fine. The bipolar. Every single Jew is bipolar. Every single Jew is bipolar. We have two souls inside of us. The animal soul wants nothing but this physical world. The godly soul wants nothing but God. All day long, every moment of the day, you have two energies going in complete different directions. That's bipolar. So Everyone could be on medication. But if we have a clarity and a realization that what's going on from a spiritual standpoint in a deeper way, then a lot of times these so-called diseases can be worked through by healing our soul and figuring out the deeper thing inside of them. Okay, their limit has no end. Next page on page 53. This is obviously derived from the verse, for every limit I have seen an end. Your commandment is very broad. This is from Tehillim 119. The Hebrew word for limit here is taklit, which also means completion or ultimate. It is derived from the root kala, which means to complete or finish. As in the heaven and the earth were finished, kala. Oh, you're going to love, you probably already do the Sefer Yetzirah, because they take roots of Hebrew words and they connect them in really deep meanings, because the Hebrew language, as you know, it's not modern Hebrew. It's not modern Hebrew. You know, it's very interesting, and I don't want to philosophize on this because I don't know the answer, but I just noticed something recently that started creating an awareness in my brain. There's been several attacks. There was one in California a couple of days ago against Jews. And every attack starts from the same thing. Someone heard people talking Hebrew. Every one of them. It happened in Cyrus. It happened in Thailand. There's been about 10 of them in the last several months. And everyone started from, we heard that, it says, and heard him talking Hebrew. So what does that mean? I'm not trying to say what it means, but I am saying, for example, when the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote 100 years ago in the Huti Devorim that Israel is a holy country with a holy language and a holy Torah that has been infected with klipa, and that has to be pulled out, will be a painful process. I'm not suggesting it, but there's a place to possibly consider that the Hebrew language has been turned into impurity. And this is impurity latching onto this. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. It's something that I've been thinking about that I need to think more about. But it's just interesting because it connected to me again yesterday. I'm like, it keeps happening. And every article starts with the same. They overheard them speaking Hebrew. They overheard them speaking Hebrew. So on a pshat and a simple say, okay, anti-Semitism, they're Jews. But I think there's something deeper there because they could have seen a Jewish star. They're not attacking people with Jewish stars. How come when hearing the Hebrew language? So it's just interesting to note how holy the Hebrew language really is and how every single language and every word and every root has such deep mystical connotations to it. And some people are using this language in a garbage way. And it's all I'm saying.
They are in their songs. They are.
Yeah.
The slings and the songs. And
Yeah.
Now let's Kodesh think of it.
Correct. What is modern Hebrew? I don't know really what that, it's a whole interesting conversation, but when you go through the Sefer Yetzirah, you see how the roots are connected to such deep, every Hebrew letter, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the building blocks of all of creation. What is an aleph bet? Alphabet. Where does alphabet come from in the English language? Aleph bet. The 22 Hebrew letters, every time you put them in a shape, we're going to get to in the Sefer Yetzirah, it's called the 231 gates that they all travel through. 231 gates are every single combination of aleph through taf in each possible way. 231 combinations. Those are the gates that channel through and create all the energy in every single thing in the world. To understand, they all derive from the Hebrew language and how holy the Hebrew language is meant to be. Just something to think about. Okay, so the word taklit also denotes purpose, since when something fulfills its purpose, it is said to be completed and fulfilled. The expression, their limit has no end, kates, can be compared to the earlier expression of their measure, has no end, sof. Both words, ketz and sof, denote an end, but the shade of meaning is somewhat different. The word sof is derived from the Hebrew word safa, which means to cease to exist. The term ketz, on the other hand, comes from ketzatz, meaning to cut off. Hence, the end implied by sof is where something ceases to exist, and while ketz implies the point where it is cut off. That is the extreme boundary or limit. As one authority puts it, sof is the end in relation to what follows it, and ketz is the end with regard to that which precedes it. So, sof again is the end to the relation to that which follows it, meaning it's the end thing. And Ketz is the end with regard to that which precedes it. So one after, one before. Let's see what it says about that now. When the Sefer Yetzirah spoke earlier on the Sefirot as extensions, the text says that they have no sof. This indicates that there's no place where they cease to exist, no matter how far one goes, right? Ein sof, no end. So there's no end to God's, there's psukim in the Torah, it says there's no end or limit to God's kindness. What is kindness? Chesed, meaning chesed or goodness or kindness exists in eternity. Every mitzvah we do, every good deed we do, just think about that for a second. Every time you do something good for another person, every time you do a mitzvah, every time you do something that is positive, that is good, it lasts forever. Not just in this life, but in the life to come, in the days of Mashiach. Every single mitzvah we do will be like a tree that keeps giving fruit for eternity. It never ends because chesed never ends. There's no end. So it's a concept of all of these sefirot literally go on ad infinitum in every single direction. It's wild if you think about it to realize that north, south, east, west, up, down, all these energies, good, evil, can continue going on and on and on and on with literally without ending. So similarly, when God is called Ein Sof, literally it means without Sof, meaning no end. It also means there's no place where he ceases to exist. So on one hand, it means God is eternal, it goes on forever. On the other hand, it means there's no place in the world where God doesn't exist. This is a very profound concept that was brought down from the Sefer Yetzirah to the Zohar to the teachings of the Arizal to ultimately Chassidus. And when the Alter Rebbe brought this down in the Tanya, it caused a lot of opposition. It existed before with the Arizal, but it wasn't really discussed because it wasn't spread out so much. Of this concept that God is in the bathroom with you. A lot of Orthodox Jews would go berserk if you told them that. What? The bathroom's a place of filth? God's no. How can you say such a thing? There's nowhere in the world that God doesn't exist. Because if there's a place in the world God doesn't exist, it couldn't exist. Because God's energy is what keeps it alive. Yeah, they don't believe that. They think what you do in the privacy of your home. Oh, they don't believe it.
They don't get it, because.
But they don't believe it. They're going to say, no, it's not correct.
I understand, but I think it's hard concept for them to understand.
However you want to look at it, you say true or false. God's with you in the toilet. They're going to say false. So they don't believe it. They don't understand. Whatever. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah, everything. It's interesting. We see this idea in a way playing out. Go ahead.
No, I remember the kids in my class always saying not in the back, not me.
Because it makes sense logically, right? You wouldn't be there.
Standing in the back. Yeah. It's not a person.
Yeah. It's not a person. It's an interesting idea. You see what's going on right now, the Havdil with these Epstein files, and the extent of, we don't know a fraction. What's coming out of the news right now is a one minuscule dot of what's really going on, not just there, but his compound in New Mexico, they say is 100 times worse than the island. No one's digging in there. They said there's buried you can't even imagine what's going on there. And for months and months and months, the FBI doesn't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it. You can't even begin to and that's just one person. There's so much of this going on in the world that people can't understand this concept of evil, and I don't want to get into it too much, but the idea is that people who operate in this level of depravity and evilness don't think anyone knows. And they think that what they do behind closed doors, kept in secret, they sign non-disclosure, whatever, will never get out. But they don't understand that just like that whole entire island had video cameras everywhere, the whole entire world is seen by God. There's nothing anyone does or thinks in this world that God is not aware of. And when you do tshuva from your heart, you can erase it. But the point is, go ahead.
No, the thinking part, I remember that they scared us a bit about too much about like I start bugging out.
He's in your thoughts?
Yeah, if I think something bad, it's gonna happen. Or if I think so, it's not true though.
No, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there is a manifestation that if you focus on something, that energy comes, right? For example, you say to yourself, I want to get a new car. Like, what kind of car? I'm looking at a Toyota Corolla. Oh, really? All of a sudden, the next week, you'll see 20 Toyota Corollas. Where? Oh my God. I was just talking about, oh my God, what? There is something of manifestation of energy. So the ideal concept explains in the Tanya is that we can't necessarily control if a negative thought enters in our brain, but we can control if we dwell on it and we ruminate on it and we focus on it, we think about it, and we're constantly worried that something bad's going to happen. That's not healthy, right? But God exists in our thoughts, sure. He exists everywhere. There's nowhere he doesn't exist. Or we couldn't have a thought. We couldn't have speech. We couldn't have it in everything. So this concept, realizing that God is everywhere and there's no place that God doesn't exist, I think it's coming out more and more in the world surrounding us and what we're seeing. Okay. Here, on the other hand, the Sefer Yetzirah is speaking of the Sefirot as they are seen in a mystical vision. The text then says that their purpose, completion, and outcome have no limit, Kates. Even though the Sefirot are seen only as a flash, there is no limit to the insight that they can imbue to the individual. Meaning that even though they only are seen like a lightning in a very short flash, the level of depth, it's hard to explain to someone a mystical experience who has not experienced a mystical experience. It reminds me of the story I quoted often with the Arizal, when it was one Shabbos afternoon and he was sitting in the Beit Midrash with a bunch of his students, and he closed his eyes for a few minutes and he dozed off. He was sleeping for 10, 15 minutes, but while he was sleeping, his face was bright red and you saw just godly energy emanating from it and all these reactions, and it was like, whoa. And after he woke up, he was like, whoa. And one of his students said, what did you just see? He said, it would take me 40 years to explain to you what I just saw. 40 years in a 10-minute nap. Because when you enter into the mystical realms, you're above time, and your expansion, your consciousness, some people have had a taste of this or a sliver of it through plant medicine or hallucinogenic experiences, where you literally are like in a totally different realm in consciousness, and then you come back to this world and you're like, whoa. Like, wow. Like because when you enter into the realm of spirituality, of altered states of consciousness, especially when we're talking about holy mystical consciousness, the amount of insight that you can gather and the amount of depth you can gather is just beyond any type of explanation, and pales in comparison to any type of learning or tools you have in this world. What was that? Yeah. So it's very true, and unfortunately, that is what has happened to a lot of people. That there are people who plant medicine has become more and more widespread. I don't hear you. More and more common. More and more common. It is entering into the mainstream. It's in the religious world big time. Mushrooms and MDMA and psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms, and MDMA, which is the active ingredient in ecstasy, and ketamine. All of those are fairly close within the next few years to being legalized and being prescribed, because they're realizing the benefits of them. But what has happened is there are people who, like anything else, instead of using it as a tool, get so addicted, like any other drug, to the experience, that they have so much joy and happiness when they're in this altered state of consciousness. And then they come back to their real life, which what you're supposed to do is prepare for this type of experience. After the experience, work with a therapist to integrate that experience into your life. But what happens is, for people, it could just become another high where it's so enjoyable, it's so pleasurable, that afterwards you're like, this sucks. I want to go back inside and go back in there.
When someone gets stuck in the trip, I know that their subconscious, they didn't want to come back.
Could be. There are people that I can't wrap my head around that's possible, but they say there are people that have, like, I've seen in Israel people who've come back from India who are, I don't know what they did over there, Jews who've gone there for mystical experiences, but I've seen people that are just, they're gone. Like they're
So what happened to them?
I don't know. I don't know what they did. I don't know what they experienced, but like anything else, there's use and there's abuse. And
For it to be so powerful, it never ended. Maybe it was something in your head that just told you not to come back.
could be like, that's what is an alcoholic? It's the same thing. They can't deal with this reality. Yeah.
I don't know if this concept is true that you get drunk.
Yeah.
you get stuck
Oh, I don't know.
Like, mine
I don't-
never the same.
Yeah. There are so many, there's so many levels and so many interpretations that, it's hard to comment on it, but what you're saying has validity. Could be, that unconsciously they don't really want to come back to this reality, right? So we'll end there and pick up where we left next time. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your journey. I don't know how to stop this. Oh, just want to go like this.
It's interesting. Doesn't he write